Thank you very much. Well, thank you, Frank, for that very warm introduction, and thanks to all of you for turning out, especially on a morning like this. I'm delighted to be here. I've been to Columbia a time or two, including several weeks one summer long ago for my Army Reserve summer training, and was happy to get out of Fort Jackson as well, but glad to be back here. And I want to congratulate Frank and Breitbart and the others for sponsoring this conference on national security. You've seen the four themes they want to cover: the decline in our military, the vulnerability of our electrical grid and our critical infrastructure, the rise of the global jihadist movement, and the threats to our border security. You're going to hear from a lot of people today, very knowledgeable on these subjects, and they are, I think, among the most critical issues that we face and need to discuss in the 2016 election campaign. Because there's no doubt we are met here today at a time of grave crisis for our country and its place in the world. And of course, the gravest threat to our national security sits in the Oval Office. And we've got 2 years to go. Let's just consider a few of the things that we face that threaten our country and our friends and allies. Most in the news right now is this deal with Iran on their nuclear weapons program that the President has been determined to sign for 6 years. This deal, and we do know what's in it, despite what Secretary Kerry says, they've been leaking out the good parts, what they think are the good parts. You can imagine what's in there that they think are the troubling parts that they haven't leaked out. It only gets worse once we know what's in it. But this deal with Iran will be an unprecedented act of surrender by the United States. It's an act of appeasement that will legitimize this regime of terrorists who seized power in 1979 and have financed terrorists all around the world more than any other state sponsor since then. And it will legitimize their nuclear weapons program. Where has Obama focused his attention? On 47 Republican senators who stood up for the Constitution. On the Prime Minister of our closest ally in the Middle East, Bibi Netanyahu, came to Washington to tell the Congress the truth about this deal. President coddles the Iranian Ayatollahs and attacks his fellow countrymen and our closest allies when it comes to this deal. And the fact is that the deal is rotten through and through. The foundations of the deal are fundamentally flawed. We don't know the full story on Iran's nuclear weapons program. You hear the commentators talk about it every night as if we've got inspectors all over Iran and know what they're doing. There's much we don't know. And after the deal is signed, there will be utterly inadequate inspection. So we're starting from inadequate knowledge about what Iran is doing to build nuclear weapons, and for as long as this deal remains in force, we will still have inadequate knowledge of whether they're cheating. We have no reason whatever to trust Iran's commitments. They have violated every commitment on the nuclear side they've made since they voluntarily became a member of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and committed they wouldn't build nuclear weapons, which everybody knows they've been doing for at least 25 years. And besides that, the commitments they're making are inadequate. It doesn't cover their weaponization efforts. It doesn't cover their ballistic missile program. There really is no deal that I would trust Iran with. This is a regime determined to have nuclear weapons, and this deal will give it to them. We've seen the consequence of the administration's indifference and hostility toward Israel, and Israel will be the principal target of Iranian nuclear weapons once they acquire them. You know, the Israelis face what former Prime Minister Ariel Sharon called the threat of a nuclear holocaust. Israel's a small country, half a dozen nuclear weapons. There is no more Israel. But Israel is not the only country threatened. Let's be clear, we are threatened too. Our infrastructure, our borders are porous. The Iranians can give one of their nuclear devices to a terrorist group who can smuggle it into the country, put it on a tramp steamer, and explode it in any American harbor. They don't need ballistic missiles, although they're getting very close to it. And just as the administration has bungled the threat of Iranian nuclear proliferation, they've ignored what's going on in North Korea, also a heavily sanctioned country that's already exploded 3 nuclear devices. The consequences of this deal will make the Middle East more insecure, make us more insecure, make our friends and allies more insecure. The president's determined to do it. The Iranian leadership knows it. They're just now extracting the last concessions. They'd drag it out for another couple weeks if they could, because they'll get more concessions. The administration is so determined to sign. And this is just one example, unfortunately, the most immediate, of a president who doesn't seem to care about American national security. I think he believes it's a distraction from what he really wants to do, which he told us in his 2008 campaign was to fundamentally transform America. He has gutted our defense budget, cutting close to $1.5 trillion off the Bush administration baseline in 2008. Weapon systems that we desperately need are not being bought. Our military is understaffed. His own budget projection for the Army force level is the same as our Army in 1938. So that was a good year, wasn't it? Our Navy has the same number of ships at sea we had in 1916. And it's going down. Even a new president in 2017, rebuilding the Navy, will face ships aging out of their useful lives and the size of the fleet diminishing. We face challenges from Russia and China that we're not answering. From Russia in Eastern and Central Europe, from China in the East and South China Sea. That may sound like a long way away, but remember the 2 hot wars that our country fought in the 20th century, where in 1945 we said there will be no more changing borders on the continent of Europe because of military force, and Vladimir Putin's doing it, and we're standing by. And if China can make the South China Sea a Chinese lake, they will have their hands around the throats of the economies of South Korea, Taiwan, and Japan, because all of their oil from the Middle East goes through the South China Sea. We could help correct that if America would develop its own oil and natural gas resources, but the president stands in the way of that too. Be an economic boon for our country and a strategic game changer, and of course, he's against it. Now let's consider the threat that we see on TV all the time of international terrorism. Ladies and gentlemen, the Middle East and North Africa are descending into chaos. Crisis after crisis and country after country have come together in a way that is destroying the system of states around the region. Somalia hasn't had a government in 25 years. The government in Yemen has collapsed, and we see there both Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and the al-Houthi, a surrogate militia for Iran. ISIS has taken over eastern Syria and western Iraq. The governments of Syria and Iraq have effectively collapsed. The Sinai Peninsula is out of control of the government of Egypt, and our ally Israel is threatened on all sides. Boko Haram in Nigeria has declared its allegiance to ISIS. The threat is growing. Look at a map. You cannot say with a straight face, unless you live in the White House, that the threat of terrorism is receding. I think it's obvious to all of us. And it's been obvious for a long time. It became painfully, tragically obvious to us in Benghazi on September the 11th, 2012, when Ambassador Chris Stevens and 3 other Americans were murdered by terrorists, while our government stood by and did nothing. The next Democratic nominee for the presidency has insisted right on through, including in her memoirs, that she didn't really know what was happening in Benghazi that day. There was the fog of war, and that's why she thought that this was an attack by people upset about a Mohammed video. She talked to the President of the United States once that day, half an hour before a press release came out blaming the attack on the video. That whole day, she never spoke once to the Secretary of Defense, not once, to say, how can we protect our people who are exposed in Libya? And then, She went home for the evening. She went home for the evening, while the fate of our people in Tripoli and Benghazi was still uncertain. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I have worked for 6 different secretaries of state. Very different people, different backgrounds, different styles. Not one of them would have gone home that evening. Not one of them. And this woman thinks she's qualified to be President of the United States? But even worse than the administration's performance, even the dereliction of duty by the Secretary of State doesn't match what they didn't do afterward. 2.5 years after the attack, the American response is precisely this. We have arrested one person, and we're going to give him a full due process criminal trial in federal court. What is the lesson for terrorists and state sponsors of terrorism all over the world? The lesson is that under Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, you can kill the personal representative of the President of the United States and do it with impunity. Now, if the President can't defend his own personal representatives, what do mere citizens think that he's going to do for them? 2 have been beheaded by ISIS in the last 6 months. Have you heard the President on that subject recently? Have you heard him on the subject of the Coptic Christians, 21 beheaded by ISIS in Libya? This administration is not engaged in a war against the terrorists. They're engaged in a war against us, and ladies and gentlemen, they are winning. Now, what is to be done about this? I think Frank Gaffney already indicated to you that you have a unique role as voters in South Carolina. The candidates are going to listen to what your concerns are. And my view is that given the threats that our country faces around the world, national security has to be at the center of the 2016 presidential nominating process. And I tell you this, the would-be candidates can't just come in and give a speech on foreign policy and say, oh, well, check that box. Now I can move on to the critical subject of broccoli subsidies or something like that. They can't just have a couple of paragraphs in their campaign stump speech. I think what we need from all of the people who would be president is that in their mind and in their heart, they have to believe that protecting our country is the president's first and most important job. I don't want rhetoric from candidates. I want commitment to that. We have twice in the last 2 elections now elected somebody who was not competent to be President of the United States on national security grounds. We cannot make that mistake again. And it's people like you, people like those in this room today who can and I think will make the difference in 2016. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you. I've been asked to take a few questions, which I'm happy to do. We don't have much time, but I'm happy to do it. I don't know if there's a microphone. Raise your hand. I'll repeat the question. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Go it alone. I remember when they bombed Iraq's nuclear reactors when nobody else would respond, and they'll do whatever they have to. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, this is a very important point, because our president, this is another example of our president at work. He says with respect to the Iranian nuclear weapons program, all options are on the table. Nobody believes him. He talked about red lines in Syria. He ignored them. This goes on and on. You know, when the word of the President of the United States doesn't mean anything, we're in trouble as a country, and we are in trouble as a country today. Yes, sir. So the gentleman by the microphone, please.
Go
ahead.
Ambassador Bolton, we see now a huge contretemps between the President and the Congress about what the President is doing in Iran, and the issue about whether it's constitutional what he's doing and the Congress approval, et cetera, et cetera. And the threats seem to be floated that the President intends to sidestep this by going to the UN Security Council, in which case we would be bound. Is there a response that we can make, and would pulling us out of the United Nations satisfy that?
Well, this is a very pertinent question, and it tells you a lot about Barack Obama, that his preferred way to get this awful deal with Iran approved is not to go to the American Congress, but to go to the UN Security Council. I have no doubt that that's what he intends to do, and I have no doubt that he'll get a resolution to his liking, because if we're not protecting our interest, you can bet that Russia and China aren't going to protect our interest for us. Here's the good news. Nothing in that resolution, whatever it says, can stop a subsequent American administration from doing the right thing with respect to Iran's nuclear weapons program. We have even the UN Charter in Article 51 recognizes we have an inherent right of individual and collective self-defense, and the Supreme Court has been unambiguous that Congress and the President are not bound by international treaties or obligations if a subsequent Congress and administration desire to change it. Now, that won't mean that this isn't a bad resolution. It will be a bad resolution, but it's not going to stop us. The United Nations does not have authority superior to the U.S. Constitution. Period. Close quote. I take just one more. You've got a lot of good panels coming. I don't want to take all their time. Yes, sir.
Ambassador Bolton, would you comment on our deteriorating relationship with the Saudi Arabians and their recent decision to obtain nuclear technology and possibly nuclear weapons technology from the South Koreans?
Yeah, well, this is something that, frankly, I've worried about for a long time. It's not just the threat of Iran getting nuclear weapons, although that's bad enough. It is the inevitability that Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Turkey, and perhaps other states in the region will also get nuclear weapons, so that in this very volatile area in a short period of time you could have half a dozen nuclear weapon states. I used to think the nuclear arms race would not begin until Iran perhaps actually detonated a nuclear weapon. But Barack Obama, by this negotiation, which has made so clear to all of our friends in the region that he's going to allow Iran a free path to nuclear weapons, has already precipitated the nuclear arms race. So that the danger we hope to avoid, and I've been working on this for 15 years, the danger we hope to avoid is now imminent. And we can attribute it entirely to President Obama. And I'll just close with this. The next 2 years can't pass swiftly enough, but for God's sakes, let's not make the same mistake in 2016. Thank you very much.